Hey guys, my presentation is on culture and emergency management by me, Mary Miss. We're going to start off with what is culture, and culture as defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary is the beliefs, customs, arts, etc. of a particular society, group, place, or time, or a particular society that has its own beliefs, ways of life, art, etc., or a way of thinking, behaving, or working that exists in a place or organization such as notes that in her book Dealing with Disaster that there are many factors that contribute to how individuals, the local, the state, and the federal government respond to disasters and emergencies and how it is thereby perceived by the general population. And one of these is the gap between bureaucratic and emergent norms. So Schneider's 5 factors that influence the gap between bureaucratic and emergent norms are: first, the magnitude of the disaster; secondly, the degree of governmental preparedness; third, the level of communication and coordination; fourth, the goals of the governmental response system; and lastly, the orientation of disaster victims. We will be primarily focusing on the 5th factor, the orientation or culture of the disaster victims, for this presentation. So, orientation or culture of disaster victims. The prevailing values and previous experiences of the affected population play an important role in how the size of the gap that develops between bureaucratic and emergent norms. Close-knit communities with long traditions of cooperative interaction are more likely to provide mutual support and reinforcement for their members when a disaster strikes. This helps maintain social order during the disruptive situation, and it facilitates a relatively prompt return to normal pre-disaster. So here are some examples of communities in a disaster. For example, the Cajun communities in rural Louisiana usually experience very little disaster-related disruption, even during the kinds of major floods and hurricanes that would incapacitate most other areas. And similarly, the close interpersonal ties that exist in many Midwestern agricultural communities help farmers cope with adverse conditions, such as droughts and crops. And in contrast, there are some areas in the United States where social norms are not well known or well articulated. For example, many hurricane-ravaged communities in Florida are populated by resettled northerners. As such, these people are less likely to turn to those around them for support during disruptive situations. And this then encourages the breakdown of any pre-established norms that may have existed before the disruptive event, and it also leaves an empty slate for the establishment of new forms of interaction, thereby facilitating the onset of collective behavior and widening of the deviation from governmental disaster relief policy. Another factor that affects culture in an individual socioeconomic status. This is because those who are generally impoverished or poor will buy or rent homes in typically low-lying areas, poorly constructed areas of living, or other impediments because of the lower price, and are thereby susceptible to more disaster and emergency situations than their higher paid, wealthier counterparts. This also leads to the assertion that because they are more susceptible to disaster and emergency situations, they experience them more and are able to be resilient to these experiences. And the same goes for people who live in areas where floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, and blizzards occur frequently. The people learn to cope with these kinds of disasters on a somewhat regular basis. Victims have a basic understanding of what has happened to them, and they have a general sense of what actions they should do to alleviate their situation. And also vice versa, the vice versa scenario would be that those who live in areas that typically don't receive a lot of disasters and emergency situations don't have experience in handling them and are therefore unsure of how to respond to the situation at hand. In conclusion, a person's orientation or culture greatly affects how they respond to disaster or emergency situations. Thank you.